everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that I think is really important and really relevant to a lot of people's lives.
Yeah. Right.
We're going to be talking about survival jobs and how the concept of UBI, universal basic income, might change things.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, so we've got some excerpts from a document called UBI, the Trap of Survival Jobs, that we're going to be looking at. And it really does raise a lot of thought-provoking points about the impact of these jobs, not just on individuals, but also on families, communities, and even like the psychology of stress.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic because, usually when we talk about work, it's all about career paths and finding fulfilling jobs, right?
Yeah.
But for a lot of people out there, work is just about, basic survival.
Yeah, just getting by. Yeah.
And that has like these ripple effects that we don't always think about.
Totally. It's like if the foundation is shaky, everything built on top of it is going to be affected. So let's start with the basics. When we say survival job, what exactly do we mean? What does that look like?
Well, imagine, working long hours, often in jobs that are like physically demanding or emotionally draining. And
Yeah.
you're making wages that barely cover your basic needs.
Rent, food.
Exactly. And there's not really any chance of moving up or getting ahead.
Right. It's not a stepping stone to something better.
Yeah, a lot of times these jobs are unstable too.
Oh, I bet.
Like unpredictable schedules, you never know how many hours you're going to get.
So it's not even like you can plan or budget effectively.
Right. It's a constant struggle.
It's, like you said, a hamster wheel. You're running as fast as you can just to stay in the same place.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And the source material talks about this idea of a scarcity mindset that can trap people in these jobs.
Right.
Can you explain what that means?
Basically, it's this idea that when you're constantly worried about like your basic needs, like, am I going to be able to pay rent this month? Am I going to have enough food for my kids?
That constant stress, yeah.
That can actually change your brain chemistry.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it triggers this stress response that makes it harder to think clearly, to plan for the future.
To even see opportunities that might be out there.
Exactly.
So it's not just a lack of motivation or willpower.
Right. It's like their brains are literally wired for survival mode.
So it makes it even harder to break out of these difficult circumstances.
Exactly. And that's where that whole idea of a trap comes in.
Yeah, it really is a trap.
Millions of people are stuck in this cycle.
And it impacts not just them, but their families too.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The document goes into detail about how children in low-income families are affected by all this.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about.
I mean, just think about it. When parents are working multiple jobs or unpredictable hours,
Mm-hmm.
they have less time and energy for their kids.
Yeah, they're just exhausted all the time.
Right. And it goes beyond just like missing a soccer game or two.
Yeah.
There's research that shows that this constant financial strain,
Right.
it actually impacts kids' emotional development and their ability to learn.
The document cites some pretty compelling research on that from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine.
Right.
And they found that children in these situations, they have higher levels of stress hormones, which can actually hinder brain development.
It's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
These kids are facing so many disadvantages right from the start.
And it affects things like memory, attention span, all
Yeah.
those crucial things for learning.
And that impact can last a lifetime.
Right.
They're less likely to graduate high school, go to college, earn a decent living as adults.
It's like a cycle of disadvantage that's so hard to break.
It really is.
There's this one example in the document that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
It's about this single mother who works as a cashier during the day and then a night janitor to make ends meet.
Okay.
She's constantly exhausted, can't afford childcare, so her kids are often left to fend for themselves.
That's so tough.
And their schoolwork suffers as a result.
It highlights how these jobs often force parents to make impossible choices.
Yeah, do you work another shift to keep a roof over your head, or do you help your child with their homework?
It's a no-win situation.
And it's not just the families themselves who feel the strain, right?
No, not at all.
This whole thing has implications for communities as well.
Absolutely. When people are struggling to survive, they have less energy and fewer resources to invest in their communities.
Yeah, it makes sense. They're just trying to keep their own heads above water.
Exactly. They're less likely to attend town hall meetings, volunteer, participate in local events.
And what does that mean for the community as a whole?
Well, it leads to a decline in civic engagement, which weakens social bonds, erodes trust.
Right, because if you're not interacting with your neighbors, you're not building those connections.
Exactly.
The document uses this really vivid example of a neighborhood struggling with crime.
Oh, yeah.
And the residents are mostly working these low-wage jobs, and they're just too exhausted to organize neighborhood watch programs or even get to know each other.
It creates this sense of isolation and distrust.
Yeah, like everyone's retreating into their own little survival bubbles.
And that has consequences for everything you know, from public safety to the local economy.
Right, because if you don't feel connected to your community, you're less likely to support local businesses, vote in local elections, advocate for improvements in your area.
Exactly. It's a downward spiral.
Where everyone loses, the community becomes more vulnerable, the individuals within it become more isolated and less hopeful.
And we haven't even talked about the impact on mental and physical health.
Yeah, we all know stress is bad. But the source material goes into some pretty chilling detail about just how bad it is for people in these situations.
Chronic stress is like a slow poison.
Yeah, it really is.
It impacts everything from our sleep to our immune system.
The document cites research showing that people in low-wage, high-stress jobs have higher rates of depression, anxiety, heart disease, even shorter lifespans.
It's scary stuff.
And there's even research linking financial strain to telomere length.
Right. Telomeres are those little caps on our DNA that protect our chromosomes.
And they shorten as we age.
Exactly. And this study found that people experiencing chronic financial stress, they had significantly shorter telomeres.
Wow, so it's not just about feeling stressed, it's literally impacting their bodies at a cellular level.
It is. The science is clear. Chronic stress is a serious health hazard.
And for people in these survival jobs, it's a constant companion.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture here, but the source material also hints at a potential solution. Universal basic income, or UBI.
Right, UBI. It's a fascinating concept because it challenges the very foundation of how we think about work and social support.
Can you give us a quick breakdown of what UBI actually is for those who might not be familiar?
Sure. At its core, UBI is a regular, unconditional cash payment that's given to every adult citizen.
Every adult citizen.
Yeah, regardless of their income or employment status.
Wow, so no strings attached, no jumping through hoops to prove you're deserving.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves a basic level of security and dignity no matter what their circumstances are.
And the source material suggests that this could have a really profound impact on those trapped in these survival jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
But how exactly would that work?
You just imagine the stress relief of knowing that you can always afford food and shelter.
Yeah, even if you lose your job or your hours get cut.
Exactly. That alone could have a huge impact on mental and physical health.
It's like taking a massive weight off their shoulders.
Right, allowing them to breathe and think clearly for the first time in a long time.
But I know a lot of people worry that if you give people a guaranteed income, they'll just stop working.
Yeah, that's one of the main concerns people have about UBI.
Does the document address that?
It does. And it's interesting because studies of UBI pilot programs have shown that people don't actually stop working when they receive a basic income.
So what do they do? Do they just work less or?
Some people do work a bit less, but a lot of them actually use that extra security to take risks.
Like what kind of risks?
Like starting their own businesses or going back to school to pursue a more fulfilling career.
So it's not about creating a nation of couch potatoes.
No, not at all.
It's about giving people the freedom to make choices that align with their values and goals.
Exactly. And that can lead to a more dynamic and productive society overall.
That's a pretty bold claim. Does the document have any evidence to back that up?
It does. It cites a pilot program in Namibia where UBI actually led to a significant decrease in poverty and child malnutrition.
Wow.
And it also mentions a study in India that found UBI recipients were more likely to invest in their businesses and improve their living conditions.
So it's not just theoretical. There are real-world examples of this working.
Exactly. Yeah. It challenges that assumption that giving people money without requiring them to work will somehow damage the economy.
Yeah, it really does make you rethink things. This is definitely making me rethink some of my assumptions about how social safety nets can actually work.
It's about shifting our perspective, focusing on empowerment and opportunity rather than just like bare bones assistance.
Okay, I'm hooked. But I know there is still a lot of concerns about like the cost and potential for unintended consequences.
No, definitely. There are a lot of questions that need to be addressed.
And we're going to dive into those in the next part of this deep dive. So stay tuned because we're just getting started.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore.
Yeah, one of the biggest concerns people have is the cost, right?
Yeah, how do we pay for this?
It's a huge question.
Mm-hmm.
But the document actually argues that We also need to think about the costs of not implementing UBI.
Oh, interesting. What do you
Yeah.
mean by that? What are those hidden costs?
Well, think about all the things we've been talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like the impact on families, the erosion of communities, the toll on mental and physical health, all those things have economic costs too.
Yeah. When you put it that way, it makes sense. So we're talking about things like increased healthcare costs because people are getting sick from stress, lost productivity because people are burned out or missing work.
Exactly. And even things like higher crime rates, which put a strain on our justice system.
Yeah, all those things add up.
And the document argues that these hidden costs, they can actually be way bigger than the price tag of UBI. It's like it's framing UBI as an investment rather than an expense.
Okay, so we're not just looking at the upfront cost, but also the potential savings down the road.
Right. And there's another interesting point that the document brings up. It argues that UBI could actually help stimulate the economy.
Mm-hmm. Now, wait a minute. How does giving people free money boost the economy?
I know it sounds counterintuitive, right?
Right.
But think about it. When people have more financial security, they tend to spend more money in their local communities.
Yeah, they're not just scraping by anymore.
Right. And that increased demand, it can actually lead to more jobs and more opportunities for small businesses.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. The money circulates within the community instead of being concentrated at the top.
That makes sense. And does the document give any examples of this actually happening?
Yeah, it mentions the Alaska Permanent Fund.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
So they've been distributing dividends from oil revenue to residents for decades. And studies have shown that it's actually helped boost the Alaskan economy and create jobs.
So it's not just a theory, there's real-world evidence to support this idea.
Right. It challenges that whole idea that giving people money without requiring them to work will damage the economy.
Yeah, it's definitely making me rethink some of my assumptions.
Me too. It's a really different way of looking at things.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits, but let's be real here. UBI is still a pretty controversial idea. What are some of the other concerns that people have raised?
Well, one of the big ones is that it'll disincentivize work. People will become lazy and dependent on handouts. Right.
Yeah, that's something I've heard a lot. How does the document address that?
Well, it points to all these UBI pilot programs that have been happening around the world.
Oh, right, like the one in Namibia we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And these programs consistently show that people don't just stop working when they get a basic income.
So what happens instead?
It seems like people use that extra income to improve their lives in different ways. Some people invest in education or training to get better skills.
Well, that makes sense.
Others use it to start their own businesses or pursue creative endeavors.
So it gives them the breathing room to actually explore things they might not have been able to before.
Exactly. The point is, it's not about eliminating work. It's about creating a system where work is more about choice and opportunity.
Not just a means of survival.
Right. And that can lead to a huge shift in individual well-being and even societal progress.
The document actually mentions a study from the Roosevelt Institute that found that UBI could actually lead to an increase in overall employment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it stimulates demand, which leads to job growth in sectors like retail healthcare education.
And it's not just about the number of jobs, but the quality of those jobs, too.
How so?
Well, if you have a basic income guarantee, you're not forced to take just any job to survive. You have more leverage to negotiate for better wages and better working conditions.
Yeah, that's true.
So it could actually shift the balance of power in the labor market, give workers more agency and autonomy,
That would be pretty amazing.
and it could lead to a more equitable and sustainable economy for everyone.
You know, I'm really struck by how this document is challenging so many of my assumptions about work and poverty and social support.
Yeah, it's really making me think differently about these issues.
And it's not just about understanding the issues, it's about exploring potential solutions.
Right, UBI is one potential solution.
Yeah,
But are there other approaches we should be considering as well?
I think so. The document does touch on some other policies, like expanding access to affordable healthcare investing in early childhood education, strengthening worker protections.
Yeah, it's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all solution here.
We need a multi-pronged approach to address all the different factors that contribute to poverty and inequality.
Definitely. And it's important to remember that these are complex issues. There's no easy fix.
But this document is really encouraging us to think outside the box, to consider solutions that might seem radical at first.
Yeah, because sometimes radical solutions are what's needed to tackle deeply rooted problems.
Right. And the potential benefits are just too huge to ignore. Imagine a world where everyone has the security to pursue their dreams, to use their talents, to live a life without the constant fear of financial ruin.
It's a powerful vision. And while UBI might not be the perfect solution, it's definitely something worth considering as we try to address these challenges.
I agree, and it's a conversation we need to be having as a society. But before we get too carried away, there's one more big question we need to address: the political realities of actually implementing such a radical policy.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Hmm.
UBI isn't just an economic or social issue, it's a political issue too.
And the document does acknowledge that there are going to be some serious hurdles to overcome.
Definitely.
All right, so we've talked about the potential benefits of UBI, and it sounds pretty amazing, right? But now let's talk about the reality. How do we actually make this happen in our current political climate?
Yeah, that's the big question. And the document doesn't shy away from those political challenges. It recognizes that UBI is a pretty disruptive concept. It challenges a lot of deep-seated beliefs we have about work and responsibility and the role of government.
Yeah, it's like we're asking people to completely reimagine how our society works.
Right, and that's bound to create some resistance.
So what are some of the main obstacles that the document identifies?
One of the biggest ones is the cost.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Critics argue that it would require these massive tax increases, or we'd have to make cuts to other important programs.
Which could have all sorts of unintended consequences.
Right. And those arguments can be really persuasive, especially when they tap into people's fears about the economy or about government overreach.
Yeah, people get scared and they start thinking, well, how is this going to affect me?
Exactly. And then there's the whole philosophical debate.
Uh-oh.
Some people just fundamentally disagree with the idea of giving people money without any strings attached.
They think it'll make people lazy or dependent on handouts.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that age-old debate about individual responsibility versus societal support.
And those are deeply held beliefs that can be really tough to change, even when there's evidence suggesting that UBI could actually benefit everyone.
Right.
But the document actually digs into some of those philosophical arguments.
It does.
Like, it challenges this idea that work is inherently virtuous and that people who aren't working are somehow lazy or undeserving.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The document argues that we need to rethink our whole definition of work and start valuing unpaid labor like caregiving or volunteering or creative pursuits.
So it's not just about having a job and earning a paycheck.
Right. It's about contributing to society in different ways.
And maybe a society that values well-being and human flourishing more than just economic output would be a better place for everyone.
That's the idea.
Okay, so I like where this is going, but how do we get from these theoretical discussions to actual policy change?
Well, the document lays out a few strategies. One is to build a really broad coalition of support.
So not just people on one side of the political spectrum.
Right. It means reaching out to people across the political divide and emphasizing how UBI could benefit everyone, not just those who are traditionally seen as poor.
So finding common ground and building on those shared values that we all hold dear.
Exactly. It's about framing UBI as a human issue, not a political one.
And showing how it could create a more equitable and just society for all of us.
Right.
But is that really possible? Can we actually overcome these political divisions that seem so deep and so entrenched? I mean, look at how divided things are right now.
It's not going to be easy, that's for sure. The document acknowledges that. But it also argues that we can't give up on trying to build a better world.
So we need to be both idealistic and pragmatic.
Exactly. We need to have that vision of a better future, but we also need to be strategic about how we get there.
And that means being willing to have those tough conversations and challenge our own assumptions.
And find creative solutions that address the concerns of both sides.
So what are some concrete steps we can take?
Well, the document suggests starting small. Instead of pushing for nationwide UBI right away, maybe we could pilot smaller programs in different communities.
Kind of like test runs to see how it works in practice?
Right. Gather data, see what the impact is, and it also gives people a chance to experience UBI firsthand and see how it could benefit them and their community.
It's like a proof of concept that could help build momentum and shift public opinion.
Exactly. And it also gives us a chance to experiment with different models of UBI and tailor the program to the specific needs of each community.
So it's not about finding a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. It's about being flexible and adaptable. And by showing that it can work on a smaller scale, we can hopefully build the support we need to eventually implement UBI more broadly.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
Yeah, I've learned a lot.
This whole deep dive has really challenged my thinking about work and poverty and the kind of society we could create.
Me too. It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
And it's given me a sense of hope that maybe a better future is possible.
I think so too. We have the power to create a more just and equitable world.
But it's going to take all of us working together, being open to new ideas, and willing to fight for what we believe in.
I agree. And that's what I hope people will take away from this conversation. Don't just take our word for it. Go out and do your own research. Talk to people. Think critically about these issues. And then get involved.
Exactly. The future is in our hands, so let's make it a good one.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's all the time we have for today, but I encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and join us next time for another deep dive into something thought-provoking. Until then, take care.